This is part one in a series of converting a Photoshop design to HTML. And in this series, we're going to be looking at Foundation HTML. Due to YouTube time limits, there'll probably be two parts even to this part one. The first question is, what's foundational HTML? So as I'm describing it here, what it is it's the group of elements that we build all of our content and design on. So that includes the doc type, includes our HTML element here, the head, the body, and then what we're going to look at today especially is these div elements that kind of say like, alright, here are the major sections of this site, and then we're going to put content inside of those sections. Alright, and don't forget as well in the head, the title element, a meta element that describes the character set, and things like language and XML namespace if you're using an XML doc type. So before you begin this though, it is good to look quickly at your Photoshop document. So one of the things is that this Photoshop should be organized well in layers. Okay, it's important that it's done that way, because later on, as we're going to convert it to it, especially in parts 2 and parts 3, it'll be really important to have that Photoshop file and the layers in it to be able to do what you need to do. This is an example of that actual Photoshop file, and you see here I can easily now turn on and off header, entries, info, links, footer, the grid design that it was used, and then within that they have separate layers for everything else, so that you can just decide like, okay, well, what if I wanted to take off one piece of it and I needed to export that as an image. It becomes much easier to say, oh well, my navigation might end up being something else, and I can remove that text there and add in my navigation later. So, or I can change colors for these kind of things as well, just very simply when they're like that, right? So here I could say like, I might export this whole thing as an image, and now I don't have to, and I can layer that navigation here that's going to be actual HTML text on top of it. Okay, so the next piece as well is that you should know your dimensions, and this is where grids and stuff can help you. But you want to know when you're looking at your design, when you're in Photoshop, well, what are things, that you didn't just draw this box here or do something else out, but well, this is X number of pixels wide, this is so many pixels tall, and that yellow part is so many pixels tall, and this is so many pixels wide. So you know all the dimensions of your design. That's also going to be an important part about translating it back into HTML. So the next part about that kind of goes along with this tool here is that grids really make all of that easier, right? So this is a tool that allows you to, if you show your columns and how many columns you have, in this case 6 columns with a gutter width, it tells you at the bottom here in the green what the widths are if you use 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns, etc. And so in general, using a grid to lay things out makes things a lot easier to work with, a lot easier to deal with, and to figure out when we're going to go later on and have to say, okay, how wide is this element, how tall is it, and so forth. Okay, so here I'm going to look sort of theoretically at the game plan about what we're going to do and what we need to do that. This is a very high level without a lot of detail, and just to get sort of the general sense of where things fit in. So creating a site is kind of like building a building, looking at the whole process. You start out with, a building is blueprints, and your site are wireframes and site maps. They're the way that you sort of get your ideas down and describe, well, what is this thing, what's going to be in it, and a little bit of how it looks. And then you really go to get a great sense of exactly how it looks, something you can show your client. You create models. In architecture, it's those sort of models you see on the left there, whereas in web design, it's you go into Photoshop and you kind of mock it up and you make a design comp of how it looks. And that kind of brings us to where we're going to be here now, is that once you have that design mock-up, you got to convert it to HTML. So your kind of raw materials and machines are one of the next things that you need to get a hold of if you're building a building. You need some machines to build it and some raw materials. And so for us, it's all HTML, and I'm emphasizing divs a lot here because they're an important part of the process. And divs are really what sort of like provide the structure and the foundation. They really help that. In HTML5, some of this is going to change a little bit. We're going to not have to use divs so much because they started adding some elements that help provide that structure instead of having to use divs. So then you start with sort of the heavy construction, right? You get your big things framed out and mapped out in the building. And in web design here, it's getting our sections mapped out, saying like, okay, here's my header, here's my footer, here's my main content, here's my sidebar. You kind of get that stuff done first, and it's usually actually a relatively simple process compared to actual construction. And then you move on, you kind of do what I'm calling light construction, right? You start adding into those major sections that you've done of your header and your footer and so forth, you add in your HTML content. So you go in and sort of say, okay, well, here's my actual, list, paragraph, and so forth. And if you don't have it yet, often you can use, as you can see here on the right, this Latin text. So sometimes you'll want to move there, but your client isn't quite ready yet, and so you can use this Latin text to help you add that light construction and get everything kind of framed out. So it's kind of like adding the walls and the floors and the frames, as you see in that top picture in the middle, to get everything ready for the next stage, which is the interior design, right? So it's saying like, all right, well, you have this kind of empty room, and now we need to add a bed, tables, chairs, artwork, all that stuff to make it look pretty. And that's essentially what the role of CSS is in web design, but we're going to add to that images. So when we're going from Photoshop into HTML, in the later stages here, that's what we're going to be looking at. How do we cut out those images from Photoshop, just what we need, but also add other things like color, width, typography, using cascading style sheets. So that's what the style sheets are for. They're your kind of like interior designer piece to it. So again, the current focus of these couple screencasts are going to be the heavy construction. So we're not going to go all the way yet. We're just going to say, okay, let's get that basic framework mapped out and ready to go.